We will now commence our second international session titled Artificial Intelligence Systems and Finance. To chair this session, Professor Michael MARTINEK from Saarland University will help us. For his presentation, Leveraging AI to Track Illicit Financial Flows, Professor Umut TÜRKSEN gave this presentation. The next presentation will be titled The Certification of High-Risk AI Systems from Professor Dimitrios from Saarland University as well. For her presentation and last presentation, A Right to Explanation on Algorithmic Hiring Decisions in the UK, Dr. Alison Liu from Liverpool John Moores University, UK. The stage is yours, Professor.
Yes, welcome back, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor and pleasure to host the next session, which has already been introduced. And yes, I understand that not everybody is back. The breaks are a little bit short. The more so since they are also designed for networking. It's not so easy to network in 2 or 3 minutes. Anyway, I think the best idea is to start, to commence our next session and hereby to attract all the others to come in. Our first speaker is Professor TÜRKSEN from Coventry University. The title, as you can read it in the program, is Leveraging AI to Track Illicit Financial Flows. And our session as such is named Artificial Intelligence Systems and Finance. I did not prepare an introductory note, but you all know finance governs everything, and so far we have full attention to all the subjects. With regard to Professor TÜRKSEN's speech to begin with, let me say that you should not expect a theoretical treatment of the subject. He just told me that the center of his presentation is on the development of an own system. And we are keen and eager to hear.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'll start by saying also that what I'll present is based on my personal experience and experience of end users who have been using an AI tool in their financial crime investigations. I have 2 links in my slide. On the top left corner, Protex and Trace. They are both EU-funded projects that have been completed. The first one looked at tax crimes and corruption. The second one created a platform, AI-driven platform, for joint investigations of various crime schemes, organized crime schemes, all of which include illicit finance or illicit moving of assets. The other thing I wanted to mention is the link in yellow, highlighted yellow, is a new journal on artificial intelligence, risk, compliance, and law. This will be published from 2026 onwards. My colleague, Dr. Alison Liu, is also an editor. So this is a great opportunity for academic colleagues to consider submitting articles to this journal. It will be published by Brill. So what do we mean by illicit financial flows? They mean 3 different things. Illegal money moving for illegal purposes or being laundered. Legal money is transferred for illegal purposes. For example, let's say a professor is a sympathizer for a terrorist organization donating part of his legally earned money to a terrorist organization, or it can mean money that is legally earned, that is taxable, but is not supposed to move out of that jurisdiction before it is taxed. Or it could also involve a cultural good, tarihi eser, that is legally excavated, but it is not supposed to leave the country. So that can be an illicit transaction. And a lot of these illicit financial flows or financial crime require electronic evidence. According to Europol, 85% of cases that cross-border involve electronic evidence requests. And in order to analyze electronic evidence, we need machines to do it for us because there's so much data. And we need to ensure this electronic data, this electronic evidence is reliable. We can present it to the prosecutor, to the courts to make a decision. So my emphasis in this talk will be more about not just the AI, but what are the type of information we need to counter financial crime, and also what type of information or data or evidence we need in order to make sure our prosecutions, investigations are successful. Of course, there are many factors that underpin on a success of criminal procedure or countering financial crime. I've summarized them here, and I won't have time to talk all about them, but more than happy to answer questions either at the end or later. But I want to mention something that is quite contemporary, which is the external factors, how that can impact data quality. So what do you think this is a map of? Can anyone guess what this is? These red dots? So these are the 35 plus seaports owned by the Chinese government. And they can create their own bylaws, and they regulate and supervise the documentation, the goods coming in and out. So if the Chinese government doesn't want to or allow for information to be reliable, doesn't matter how good an AI system you have, right? If the data is manipulated, we are not going to get the results. So this is one example. Another example is not long ago, in December, Russian Federation, the central bank in Russian Federation, issued a guidance manual for its citizens how to use cryptocurrencies to overcome the sanctions regime. So when you have a state entity advising its citizens how to undermine a legal regime in another country or jurisdiction, doesn't matter what type of AI system you have. So there are very complex factors in play. And you can look at those factors also from the Financial Action Task Force. They had a massive study. I put the reference for those who are interested. But AI has been used in many sectors for several, actually 2 decades now, banking leading the way. But all these uses have happened in a legal vacuum, no proper oversight. And majority of those tools come from non-European jurisdictions, typically USA, Israel, China. So the project I mentioned, the TRACE project, where we created a financial investigation tool, it is 100% made according to the EU law. And it has been used already by a number of agencies, the Federal Police of Austria, Federal Police in Germany, Ministry of Defense in Austria, a number of FIUs. We have Estonian Tax and Customs Authority, and it informed the European Commission's policy documents, including also the European Parliament. So it's been impactful in many different areas. And some of the training sessions we run include also agencies from this country, Turkey, so Ministry of Finance and staff from Jandarma and Coast Guard Academy in Ankara, and training sessions at the NATO center of excellence for counterterrorism in Ankara as well. So these are the fundamentals of any computing system, AI system. Without these elements, you can't have a reliable decision making. And as I said, I will focus on the data. Why? Because you can have face recognition or image recognition system empowered by AI, but it may not give you an accurate result if you don't train the machine to look at the context. So a machine may think this is a tiger from a distance if it doesn't know what time of the day it is, and those bars are creating the shadows on a dog which looks like a tiger. So this is a simple example of where AI can easily give you the wrong result. And this is very important because particularly in financial crime investigations, we are looking at the possibility of the suspects being put into prison. So the stakes are very high. So we have to ensure that the system and the data, the evidence, are 100% court-proof, reliable. So I'll use this case as an example of how complex things can be. This is not a very new case, but it's a concluded case involving the Lebanese Canadian bank for a very elaborate money laundering scheme. The scheme starts in Colombia with cocaine being transferred to Africa. With the money there, they buy some used cars from US. Some of the drugs and money go to Europe. Some of the also money goes to China. In China, they buy white goods, refrigerators, televisions, computers, which are shipped back to South America and sold. So you are virtually dealing with all the continents here, and you're dealing with many, many different legal systems. In each legal system, the information, the evidence, and investigations are conducted differently, and you have different standards of data. So today, majority of financial crime investigation tools that are using AI are only able to analyze structured data, like an email or a WhatsApp message. So what we've done is that we can also analyze unstructured data. For example, a police officer taking notes on a pen and paper, right? So we can analyze and put that into our analytics. Or a photo of many different items. So it's more advanced and agile. So we asked, this is an empirical analysis of the findings from end users. So we asked 50 plus law enforcement agencies what sectors are typically involved in illicit money flows. So real estate, precious metals, online gambling, etc. And the crimes associated to those are on the right-hand side. You can see money laundering and tax crimes, tax fraud are the prominent ones. So accordingly, we need to collect the right information to understand what's happening. So I'm using some examples you may be familiar with from this country. MASAK, our FIU in Turkey. So if you look at the figures, the suspicious transaction reports, the numbers have been increasing in the hundreds of thousands, nearly 500,000. So that creates not necessarily good information, what we call information pollution. Because banks are not police investigators. They are trying to avoid fines. So they have automated systems, often empowered by AI, and they have risk categories. And then if the risk is presented, they make a report to MASAK. And this trend is the same in all other countries. I'll give you examples in a minute. I'm also giving you when suspicious activity report must be submitted. In Turkey, it is 10 days. Why this is important? Because we have a rule of golden hour. When you're investigating any crime, you have a very short period of time you can gather the evidence reliably, because criminals are clever. They are going to erase their tracks. They are going to move their assets out of your reach, so you can't confiscate and seize those assets to recover. And recovery of assets is one of the biggest failures of any law enforcement agency in the world. In European Union, 2 years ago, the percentage of recovery of assets, criminal assets, were 0.5%. Only last year, Europol announced that that's gone up to 1%. Okay, 100% increase, but still very small amount. So it is so important for us to be able to understand what's happening in a criminal scheme and identify the assets, the companies, the people quickly, so we can confiscate and seize the assets, and then if they are found guilty, we can recover the assets. That's so important. In the UK, similarly, hundreds of thousands of SDRs or SARs are submitted, over 637,000. But the people, very important people or professionals, arguably those of professionals have more information about their clients and their businesses, like accountants, auditors, lawyers. They make very few reports, very few. So we have to ask the question, why this is so? Why are we getting hundreds of thousands of reports based on just the transaction information from one bank account to another, but not really getting anything more from, let's say, accountants or lawyers? They see not just the transaction, they see contracts, they see annual reports, and all sorts of other information involved in a company or a person. So that's the crux of the matter. You know, we need to collect more data, first of all, that's one principle, and we need to collect it quick. So in the UK, as soon as practicable, the suspicious activity report must be submitted to the FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. Germany, similar story, hundreds of thousands of reports. You can see the numbers of professionals in comparison to the number of banks, and we get from auditors 2 reports, from lawyers 22 reports, yet banks hundreds of thousands. Netherlands is the same, very few from very key professionals. So how do we use the AI? So I'm giving you some examples of, I won't be able to share with you everything what our tool is capable of, because we certainly don't want criminals to know the capabilities of these tools, but I can share you some publicly available capabilities. And one of them we included in our analytical AI tool is how high-value assets are treated in the European Union. For example, real estate, or an expensive car like a Ferrari, or a yacht, or jewelry. So by looking at how these high-value assets are traded in each country, we can actually identify if that particular country has robust, reliable rules to identify suspicious or criminal activity. And that gives an investigator a great understanding of how and what laws are used in another country, because they often have to collaborate with other law enforcement agencies. So this is another example of how we can use AI, and this is to do with identification of entities. So our AI system can identify if a name of an entity is a person or a company. And this is, you may have seen, that's obvious, but it's not always obvious, because you have, for example, an online casino called Indiana Jones. And Indiana Jones, not only a person's name, but a fictional character, right? But it's also a company. So we can train our machine learning, an AI tool, with the human input, of course, because we made sure our investigators are always have an oversight. We intentionally decided not to allow an AI to make a final decision. I explained the reason why, because what is at stake is so important. So we never allow our AI to make a final decision. Of course, for mundane tasks like identifying an entity, it can raise a flag. So if Indiana Jones comes as a name, the machine will tell the investigator, please look at this. I've colored it orange. Are you sure this is a person or a company? Then the investigator can go in and tick, yes, this is a company. I want to look at it as a company rather than a person. So that's what we can do. And of course, I was talking about the risk factor. So if you have a company or a person in, let's say, Switzerland and Germany, and assets being transferred, then you can look at the risk factor of this valuable asset. Or you can look at the risk factor in terms of the banking regulations, or the transparency or secrecy. And then the system, once you have all the information you want to put into the AI system as an investigator, you create what we call a library for each case you want to investigate. It then identifying the entities, peoples and companies, maybe in the future AI, e-personalities in our investigation tool. It creates a picture, starts creating a picture of the connections between these entities. And in doing so, it also uses what we call OSINT, open, what's OSINT in English? Open source intelligence. So this is, open source intelligence is what you put on Instagram and Twitter, your Facebook account, photos you share about this event on LinkedIn, or any other publicly available information can be analyzed. So if I have a photo taken with Professor MARTINEK, and later on I'm found to be guilty of embezzlement of funds, you know, he might be a suspect. Oh, he's doing business with Professor MARTINEK. So agencies can use open source intelligence also, understanding what's going on in this big picture. And you can also have, in an investigation, you can ask a bank, you know, I need all the emails between your client and you for the last 10 years. And they are under an obligation to give you this information. And often they give everything. So you may end up with 15,000 emails in the last 15 years, and 5,000 of those emails are in Turkish, another 5,000 is Russian, another 5,000 are in Arabic, and another few thousand are Finnish. And you are an investigator based in Turkey, you only speak English and Turkish. So our system can also translate in 15 different languages and make sense of what is being communicated. So those are the things how we can leverage AI in a financial crime investigation. And we paid a lot of attention to user experience. So we didn't just create something in a lab. As we are creating it, we had end users in our project telling us what would be useful for them, but we also did a survey of what would convince an investigator to use a tool like ours. So the first most important thing they said was simplicity. Because the current products that are available, they are not only expensive, but they're also very complex. It requires advanced IT skills. So we created something that is very intuitive, very easy to use. And it empowers the investigator in charge. And it is secure. Going back to, I said I won't talk about the law much, but AI Act requires us to have security of the data and access. So we are auditable. We created a system. You can see exactly who accessed the platform, what information, evidence they looked at, and the system doesn't allow for anyone to meddle, change the evidence, the data. Because we need to protect the rights of the accused, right? So if I give you some examples also from a use case, money laundering and online casinos. Once we identify the entities in our dashboard, created a library, and created different people. You can see people's names that are involved in the scheme, that use the system, or beneficiaries of the online platform for gambling. We can go deeper and look at entities and their connections, and it would look something like this initially. And we can quickly identify which other law enforcement agencies we need to connect for evidence sharing or collaboration. But also we can design the system to understand if that particular crime we are looking at in this country is also a crime in the other country. Tax crime is a very good example of this. Evading tax or tax fraud is not a criminal offense in every country. So for a police officer to collaborate with another police officer in another country, the crime must be recognized as a criminal offense in both countries. If it's not, then it will be looked at by the administrative authorities, the tax authority, for example, in this country, which doesn't have criminal powers, criminal investigation powers as such. And if you look at different online schemes in the world, the AI system, also our AI system, scrapes the dark web, not just what is available on the surface net, the internet, which we all use, but in the dark web. It will create something like this, which makes no sense, right? But we can dive deeper and we'll see. We can look at it regionally. So we can look at the companies and people in Malta, in Gibraltar, UK, Curacao, and Costa Rica. By the way, these 5 jurisdictions are the jurisdictions where most of online gambling services are provided or registered in. Okay? This is quite a focused analysis. We can also, what we can do is, nowadays AI, as well as criminals, people, use technology to open banks online, but open illegal gambling sites or casinos by also copying illegally the software of the gambling services. And this is pretty much the last slide. Thank you. I hope I was on time. Any questions, please ask.
Thank you so much, Professor TÜRKSEN. Indeed, you were almost in time. And we have learned a lot, I think. The question and discussion section is reserved for later on. So let us switch over to our next speaker, whom I have already mentioned, Professor Dimitrios from Saarland University, my faculty. The topic is the certification of high-risk AI systems, and we are keen to learn whether the certification is probably almost the first step towards a recognition and acknowledgement of e-personality.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here, and I hope I will make it one day to my second visit. It's indeed my first visit here. And the certification of high-risk AI systems, I don't think this will be the first step to e-person. I surely have some remarks on the e-person, but I will focus on my topic today. And given the time constraints, I will focus on 2 questions. Which AI systems require certification, and how can certification be obtained under the AI Act? As the title suggests, only high-risk AI systems require certification, so we have to start with the question, what is actually high risk? The qualification of an AI system as high risk is contingent upon 2 criteria: the potential for harm in ordinary interactions and the potential impact on fundamental rights associated with the system's operations. The classification of a system as high risk is regulated by Article 6. According to paragraph 1, letter A, it depends on whether the system is to be used as a safety component of a product covered by the Union harmonization legislation listed in Annex 1 of the Act, or whether it is to be classified as such as a product. Article 6, paragraph 1, letter B stipulates that the safety component or product in question must undergo a third-party conformity assessment in accordance with the Union harmonization legislation listed in the Annex 1. The classification as a high-risk system is therefore decisively influenced by the answer to the question of whether the product is already subject to a conformity assessment in accordance with the applicable Union legislation. As a result, the AI Act stipulates that the question of the requirement for conformity assessment is not determined by the Act itself, but by the specified legislation that already regulates these products. To illustrate, if a product is classified as a medicine product and is thus subject to the obligation to undergo a conformity assessment, this remains true when this product is equipped with an AI element that is relevant for the safety of the product. In the absence of a mandatory conformity assessment as set forth in the harmonized provisions, the classification of a system as high risk is, in principle, precluded. The legislator is thus introducing a loophole in the field of AI regulation. This is evidenced by the fact that a system may present a substantial risk to the health, safety, or fundamental rights of natural persons. Consequently, classification as a high-risk system may be deemed warranted, contingent on the identified criticalities. However, a qualification as high-risk AI system cannot be made without mandatory third-party conformity assessment. A separate classification is made in Article 6, paragraph 2, which stipulates that the systems listed in Annex 3 are also to be classified as high risk. This list includes, for example, systems for remote biometric identification, systems for categorization or emotional recognition, any systems that are used in law enforcement, migration issues, etc. In principle, these systems are deemed to present a substantial risk of harm to the health, safety, or fundamental rights. This schematic concept has the clear objective of ensuring legal certainty. It is intended to prevent legal addressees from being subject to the uncertainties of the interpretation of undefined legal terms. Instead, they should be able to recognize on the basis of a fixed list whether they are obliged to comply with the requirements of the Act. From the perspective of a legislator, the creation of a formal concept carries with it the potential for regulatory loopholes to emerge, as I already indicated, given the rapid pace of technology and its advancement. This issue is addressed by Article 7 of the Act, which empowers the Commission to adopt delegated acts to amend Annex 3. The question of the need for conformity assessment has a dual role. First, as a differentiating criterion between normal AI system and high-risk AI system. Second, as a safety obligation for the provider. The Act delineates two distinct types of conformity assessment. The majority of conformity assessments are conducted internally, hence by the provider himself. Conversely, administrative conformity assessment represents a notable exemption to this rule. In the latter case, certification by the competent authority is required, thus external certification takes place. The conformity assessment procedure based on the internal control is specified by Annex 6. The provider has first to verify that the established quality management system is in compliance with the requirements of the Act. Second, the provider examines the information contained in the technical documentation in order to assess the compliance of the system with the relevant essential requirements set out in the Act. And third, the provider also verifies that the design and development process of the AI system and its post-market monitoring is consistent with the technical documentation. In terms of external control, the assessment of the quality management system is carried out in conjunction with an evaluation of the relevant technical documentation by a competent authority, which is called in the Act notified body. The procedure of the external control is further specified in Annex 7. The external assessment procedure is supplemented with regulation on the surveillance of the approved quality management system. According to Article 43, Paragraph 2 for high-risk AI system referred to in points 2 to 8 of the Annex 3, providers shall follow the conformity assessment procedure based on internal control, which does not provide for the involvement of a notified body. The systems mentioned relate to critical infrastructure, education, employment, workers' management, and so on. Accordingly, the involvement of a notified body is provided for systems which pertain to biometrics, in particular remote biometric identification. Internal as external conformity assessments aim to verify that the high-risk systems comply with the requirements laid out in the AI Act. When evaluating these requirements, the intended purpose of the use of the system needs to be taken into account, as does the reasonable, foreseeable misuse of that system. If the conformity assessment indicates that the system in question meets the statutory requirements set forth in the AI Act, then it may be put into operation or placed on the market. However, prior to doing so, the provider is obliged to prepare a written EU declaration of conformity that can be read by a machine or that is signed in a physical or electronic format. This declaration must be kept at the disposal of the relevant national authorities for a period of 10 years following the placement of the high-risk AI system on the market or its introduction into service. From a dogmatic point of view, the declaration of conformity is a declaration of knowledge and responsibility. In particular, it can be foundation for civil liability claims, for example, initiated by a user. While the AI Act does not directly address civil liability, the provider will be held accountable based on this declaration of conformity under the new Product Liability Directive. So regarding the first question, to a large extent, there is no need for independent third-party verification of conformity. The internal conformity assessment is the prevailing method. This approach has the benefit of reducing procedural costs and activating superior private knowledge and experience. It is in general the case that companies are better placed than other entities to assess and evaluate their systems. They are so-called repeat players. In order to safeguard the interests of the users and other third parties, they are subject to control measures that at other levels, for example, through appropriate market surveillance or ex post claims, for instance, under the mentioned liability directive. As mentioned before, the third-party conformity assessment by a notified body is relevant for systems in the area of biometrics. A notified body is a conformity assessment body notified in accordance with this regulation and other relevant union harmonization legislation. Member states shall designate a notifying body, which in turn shall designate the notified body. The external conformity assessment is subject to administrative procedures. It is therefore initiated by application of the provider. Annex 7 specifies which information must be attached to the application. It is imperative that the information provided includes, in particular, the technical documentation and a more detailed description of the organizational structure of the provider's quality management system, as well as an account of the measures and procedures implemented to ensure that the quality management system is adequate with regard to the legal requirements. In contrast to the provider, the authority is unable to directly experience the quality management system in question. Instead, it relies on a comprehensive and transparent representation of the provider's internal organizational structure. Consequently, the provider's application must be meticulously prepared with a particular focus on the documentation, which should be comprehensive and detailed. A positive decision by the notified body will be notified to the provider. The notification shall contain the conclusions of the assessment of the quality management system and the reasoned assessment decision. An approval comes with certification, which is issued by the notified body. According to Article 44, Paragraph 2, certification shall be valid for the period they indicate, which shall not exceed 5 years for AI systems covered by Annex 1 and 4 years for AI systems covered by Annex 3. At the request of the provider, the validity of a certification may be extended for further periods, each not exceeding 5 years for AI systems covered by Annex 1 and 4 years for AI systems covered by Annex 3, based on a reassessment in accordance with the applicable conformity assessment procedures. Where a notified body finds that a system no longer meets the requirements set out in the Act, it shall suspend or withdraw the certification issued or impose restriction on it unless compliance with those requirements is ensured by appropriate corrective action taken. The suspension or withdrawal of certification is contingent upon the notification body's surveillance of the deployed system. The purpose of the surveillance carried out by the notified body referred is to make sure that the provider duly complies with the terms and conditions of the approved quality management system. For assessment purposes, the provider shall allow the notified body to access the premises where the design, development, testing of the AI system is taking place. The provider shall further share with the notified body all necessary information. The notified body shall carry out periodic audits to make sure that the provider maintains and applies the quality management system and shall provide the provider with an audit report. To sum up, the regulation of product safety in the context of AI systems is intricate and manifold undertaking, reflecting the complexity of those technologies. One of the most pressing challenges lies in the significant costs imposed on providers, particularly due to the extensive documentation requirements. While these demands aim to enhance accountability and transparency, they undeniably place a considerable burden on developers and manufacturers. Nevertheless, the AI regulation represents a thoughtful and progressive extension of existing product safety legislation. Manufacturing processes are inherently prone to errors. To address this, robust quality assurance and comprehensive risk management frameworks are indispensable. The Act effectively incorporates these principles, ensuring that safety standards keep pace with technological advancements and development. A notable feature of the Act is its delegation of conformity assessment to private sector. This approach leverages the empirical knowledge and expertise of industry actors while simultaneously alleviating the administrative burden on state institutions. Certification requirements are therefore the exemption. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to hear your questions later on.
Thank you cordially, Professor Linardatos. Without interruption, I would like to now ask Dr. Alison Louis from Liverpool John Moores University in Great Britain to take the floor on her topic, A Right to Explanation on Algorithmic Hiring Decisions in the UK. And I understand that she will have a special focus on the banking sector. Alison, I apologize, our organizers did not observe the rule ladies first in our section, but I'm sure you can understand that.
Thank you very much, Professor Martinek. It's my first time to Turkey, and I want to thank the organizers for their hospitality and also for the invitation to speak today. Since submitting the first original title, I have done some more research, and therefore I am now more specific in my latest paper. And as Professor Martinek said, it's very much about hiring algorithms and legal compliance in the financial sector, with a particular case study looking at quantitative analyst roles and AI recruitment platforms. So how do we hire investment bankers using algorithms? Because the banking sector is leading the way in using AI hiring platforms. So the context to this paper is very much based on a very recent publication of mine. It's in relation to algorithmic credit decision-making, not hiring, but credit decision-making in the UK. At the moment, a lot of banks in the UK use algorithms to decide whether they should grant a mortgage or a credit card to an applicant. However, when the decision is declined, when it's negative, then the applicant does not know the reason. And there's no right to an explanation at the moment in the UK. So you can't ask the bank, why was my application rejected? So for a lot of applicants, it's almost like a last resort to apply for a credit, a mortgage, etc. So it really does have an legal implication for them. It's a significant impact when the decision is negative. Now, under Recital 71 of the GDPR, there are two high-risk algorithmic decisions. The first one is algorithmic credit decision-making, which I have covered in my latest publication. And the second one is, you can guess it, hiring algorithms. Okay? So these are high-risk under Recital 71 of the GDPR, and that's why I think there needs to be a lot of research and recommendations in relation to this use of hiring algorithms. So at this point, I just want to see from the audience as to whether they are familiar with the concept of hiring algorithms in the sense that they know what this is about. Any show of hands where they are familiar with these algorithms? Okay. Oh, Jihan, one? You sort of understand, yeah? Okay. Has anyone actually used one of these hiring platform algorithm in an interview or in an assessment test? Any show of hands? No. Okay, so we're all quite new to this concept of e-recruitment, which is what it says in recital 71. Yeah, so electronic recruitment where algorithms are used in the hiring process. So allow me to explain how this works. Conventionally, if you have a job interview, you have either a face-to-face interview in the room or maybe an online interview these days. You may be invited to an assessment day where you have to do some psychometric tests, testing your teamwork skills, leadership skills, logical thinking skills, and maybe some other tests in terms of group exercises. When we are talking about hiring algorithms, these are software which can include online interviews, video interviews. So how this works is that you will essentially have a software where you have essentially about 30 seconds to think about the question, and then you have to give your answer online. There is no human interaction. There is sometimes a recording of somebody online to tell you what's coming up next, what to expect, and perhaps sometimes there is a practice session just before the real interview. But essentially, you are talking about maybe 6 to 8 questions online. You're given 30 seconds just before you give your answer. So JP Morgan and a lot of investment banks use these hiring algorithms, so I'm not talking hypothetically. These are used in real life these days. So JP Morgan would often start off with a motivational question, why do you want to work for us? And then you have essentially 30 seconds to think about and then give your answer. They also ask a lot about competency-based questions. So give us an example where you have shown leadership skills, where you have successfully led a team. And they also ask about commercial awareness. Obviously, it's an investment banking environment, therefore they want to know what kind of experience or knowledge you have in relation to commercial banking. 66% of organizations already use hiring algorithms, and it's quite a high percentage in investment banks. There are lots of research saying that algorithms are efficient. They're actually quite accurate compared to human judgment as well. And so there are real advantages of using these algorithms in recruitment. But also we know that, and it's very well known in lots of studies, that algorithms can cause bias, which leads to discrimination. So for me, the question isn't about whether we should use e-recruitment, hiring algorithms, etc., the pros and cons, etc. For me, I accept that it's being used already. It's a fact that a lot of organizations use it. In banking, as I say, they're leading in the use of hiring algorithms. So the question for me is, are most banks complying with legal authorities, legislation, governance mechanisms when they use these hiring algorithms? Currently, the data that is fed into these algorithms are based on successful professionals who work in these investment banks. So then the problem is that this perpetuates the type of people who work in this banking sector, the type of people who work in these investment banks. So perhaps they're mainly men, mostly young, 25 to kind of 35, mid-30s. It's well known that in investment banking, the hours are long, the pressure is high, and a lot of people leave in their late 30s, early 40s. So then do we have a problem with age discrimination? Because investment banking isn't the only sector that requires long hours, that requires working in a pressurized environment, Chefs work long hours, pressurized environment. Junior doctors work long hours, pressurized environment. Corporate lawyers work long hours, pressurized environment. So why is it that in job adverts, and I've looked at some job adverts online from recruiters, they specify that to be a quantitative analyst, you should be within a certain age bracket, within, say, 25 to 35. Now, in employment law, you can justify a certain age bracket, for example, for health and safety reasons. We know that our eyesight deteriorates, sadly, from the age of around about 25 onwards. So for pilots, it's important that they are of a certain age bracket and not of a mature age. So there is a proportionate means of justifying legitimate ground for refusing hiring more mature people for pilots. But is that justified in investment banking? Is that justified for quantitative analysts? So this is what I'm interested in. Now in America, there's a real case called Full Mind, where they used a hiring algorithm, but it was inputted so that women over 55 and men over 60 would not be considered for the job. Now, the job is for hiring English language tutors to teach in China. This is an American company, so it was brought before the American Equal Opportunities Commission, and not surprisingly, it was held to be direct age discrimination. However, most of the cases in discrimination of age is not really about direct age discrimination. It's more subtle. It's mostly about indirect discrimination. So this means that there is normally, for example, a criterion or a provision where everybody has to comply. So the age bracket of 25 to 35, everybody has to comply. But if you think about it in a deeper level, there is actually a group of people who are more disadvantaged than another group of people. So if we take the age group 25 to 35, obviously it's direct age discrimination because only people within that age bracket can apply. People under that age bracket or over that age bracket cannot apply. But, as I say, there's also indirect discrimination. Does anyone know which group of people is potentially more disadvantaged than another group? So let me tell you, women within this age group may decide to have children and therefore go on a career break, maternity leave, and therefore fewer women between 25 to 35 can apply for this position than men. And therefore this can be indirect sex discrimination in the UK. Now, with indirect discrimination, you can justify it with a defense. Again, it's that phrase of, is it a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim? So then it's down to the employer to try and justify this. Ageism in the banking sector is a real problem. 62% of financial professionals working in that sector said that ageism is a real problem. You know, why is it that only 25 to 35 can apply for the job of quantitative analyst? We've looked at other potential sectors where they are working in pressurized conditions and long hours. We've looked at, for example, the case of Amazon. You may be familiar with this case where the algorithm was said to be gender biased. So the algorithm was trained so that it picks up words where they will associate certain adjectives with the gender. So words like supportive, caring, they're more female-oriented. And then phrases like captain of the netball team, they again would be more female-oriented, whereas captain of the football, soccer team, they're more male-oriented. Amazon had to remove that algorithm because it was found to be discriminatory. They tried to initially fix it, but then actually they thought it's too time-consuming to fix it, and therefore they removed it. As I say, when it comes to job applications, it's not really direct discrimination. I think a lot of employers know that by law they shouldn't be discriminatory, but sometimes you can infer someone's age. You can work out someone's age, for example, by when they graduated. Yeah, so then you can work backwards and calculate their age. Okay, so even that kind of detail, should that be fed into an algorithm? Because that may cause bias and discrimination. When you go for a job interview, often it's about finding the best fit, the candidate best fit for the job. So you then look at the job specification, looking at the skills and experience required. But in a hiring algorithm where you're doing an online interview, it's very hard for you to know whether you've done well or not, because in a face-to-face interview, whether it's in person or online, you sort of know whether you've done well either through self-reflection, or you can tell from someone's gestures and body language. So if I give a really silly response, or I give a disastrous interview, I can pretty much tell. But with an online interview, you don't interact. There's no person to tell you or indicate anything. All you get with some of these platforms, for example, HireVue, Parametric, My Interview, is a report. Now, the report is phrased quite positively. I'm sure they're worried about litigation of all sorts. And also, they only give indications such as your leadership style is quite compassionate and supportive, but it doesn't give you any comparative indicator. It doesn't compare you with any other candidates. It doesn't give you a benchmark, for example, like a threshold score where you need to pass in order to be considered for the next stage. None of that. So algorithms, of course, have a reputation now of being opaque. So how can we trust the algorithm in the hiring process when it's opaque, when we don't know very much about what's going on? And in an employment relationship, there is, of course, power imbalance. We know that the employer is almost always in a more powerful position. So as a job candidate, you're quite helpless. So if you think you've done a good interview and yet you're not hired, you don't have much recourse at the moment. And if you think there was discrimination of some sort, again, you want to know how did it arrive to that decision and why. Now, there are several hiring platforms. One of them is called HireVue, and it's used quite a lot by investment banks. It is the most progressive in the sense that it does give you something called an explanatory statement. So it explains to you how these algorithms work in kind of layman language. Whereas in, for example, credit decision-making algorithms, I haven't seen anything like that. So HireVue is quite progressive and quite advanced in that sense. And so it's good as a beginning. But, as I say, it doesn't tell you the more contextual elements of it. So if I'm unsuccessful in an interview and I feel that there was some sort of bias and discrimination, I'd like to know how that algorithm arrived at that score, how the report came to that conclusion. So Hilke Schellmann went through this hiring algorithm process. The first time she did it really well as a strong candidate for a call center worker. The second time she spoke entirely in German when the test was very much about her linguistic skills in English. Yet she scored 6 out of 9 talking in German. And eventually she found out that the algorithm wasn't really assessing her skills, it was assessing her intonation, how she spoke, the style, maybe the accent as well. Now, this was completely surprising to everybody. So why was it the algorithm took the decision? How was it trained to accept intonation as like the crucial determining factor? And therefore, I believe that at this stage, certainly, although it's very much an exploratory process at the moment because it's quite new, there should be a right to explanation for algorithmic hiring decisions. As I say, Article 71 of the GDPR says that no one should be subject to automated algorithmic decisions at the moment. And two high-risk factors are credit decision-making and hiring decision-making. So my objectives, I know I'm running out of time, but allow me to quickly just to go through the objectives, are essentially looking at these hiring platforms in the recruitment of quantitative analyst roles in finance to see if they comply with current legislation. In the US, because the US is actually leading in the use of such software, and EU. And where we find out that they don't comply, how is it that they should address compliance, bias, and fairness issues? My methodology is very much a doctrinal and also legal comparative method. I think that by looking at this question on a global, holistic scale, my contributions are essentially intersecting between law and finance. We're identifying real high-risk areas which are in practice at the moment and give a critical insight, because we are looking at real job adverts, into the transparency gaps in AI hiring platforms. So I will make policy recommendations for regulators, for companies, and also AI hiring platforms in relation to improving their compliance. So thank you very much, and very happy to answer any questions later on.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Louis, for this as well elucidating as really practical contribution. Now we have fallen remarkably behind our time schedule. Nevertheless, I think we should leave some room and time for discussion and question before we then enjoy our lunch break. So let me encourage you to raise your questions to either of our speakers. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentations, first of all. And my question will be for Professor Alison Louis. It will be about an example that I came across about this employment thing. I've seen a presentation from someone that was specifically employed for the employment for law professions. I think the title was like similar to something like employer for law professions or legal professions. So this person explained that they were working for specifically this employment process, and they were actually also using the algorithms and AI and also some digital tools also. And my question will be that, what are your thoughts and comments about this? Because I feel like the AI is, yes, the useful in this process, and they were actually like doing another determination after AI processes with this employed person, that specific employed person. I think it would be like more beneficial or like effective for these like ageism or sexism, these things. What are your thoughts or like ideas on this?
Thank you very much for your question. I think it's a fascinating topic, and first of all I would say that algorithms shouldn't be used in isolation, so it's always in conjunction with human input. So at the moment, these platforms produce reports which then pass on to the employer. So then the employer is actually ultimately making the decision whether this person should go on to the next stage. So it's not entirely controlled by AI, because the law says that you can't be subject to that, Article 71. But then the question is, how much influence and impact do these AI algorithms have on the human employers? So if the report is fairly negative about this individual, what is the thinking process of these employers? Should they make an exception and allow this candidate to go through? Or are they entirely basing their judgment on the report made by the algorithm? So for example, when I was reading on this topic, work experience seems very vague when being inputted into AI algorithms. Now, lots of students may have work experience in retail, in hospitality, while studying at the same time. But they may not have the relevant work experience in law or investment banking because they couldn't get a suitable work experience. It's very difficult to get these kind of work placements in law and investment banking or similar competitive fields. But we know that some of these part-time jobs can have transferable skills to law, to investment banking. So how is it that AI will consider this sort of criteria? Because it's very vague at the moment. So I think there are still gaps in what's being input into these algorithms. And so the decision can be quite subjective. However, if you see the algorithm as only one part of the recruitment process, in the same way that the Compass software is being used in courts to decide whether a criminal is going to reoffend again, and that's being used in America, then that should be fine. But certainly not using algorithms as the sole factor. So I would say, I think at the moment this is still an emerging topic, AI hiring platforms. There are still gaps, there are still issues, but I think AI is to stay. I think people will use these hiring platforms, and therefore we should all have a say in this kind of platforms because it affects most people. Now, at the moment, it's limited to, say, a certain number of sectors, notably in banking, but who knows? It may, as you identify, in law, in higher education. So we certainly don't want to see bias and discrimination prevalent in these hiring platforms. So we need to rectify these problems as soon as possible. And I'm always encouraging women, ethnic minority groups, vulnerable groups to speak up, because AI is very much controlled by the Silicon Valley, by white men. And if they don't have ethnic minority professionals working in AI, then the input will always be affected in a negative way.
Thank you very much, Alison, for a very profound answer to a most intriguing question. We have little time left, dear colleagues, but I think I can invite you to raise one more question, preferably a short question for a preferably short answer then. Or are you so hungry that we should already conclude our session? So it seems, which is perfectly understandable. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to the speakers, a big thank you. And the idea is that we meet again at 2 o'clock for our afternoon session. So enjoy the lunch, networking, talks, and a break. See you later.